or number 2 under Roman numeral 8, approval of number 3, discussion of future task force meeting protocols regarding promoting members as panelists, recording of meetings.
Great. Thank you, Chair Chacon. So this was a task force member asked the chair for this item to be placed on tonight's agenda. The desire is to have a discussion regarding protocol for promoting members of the task force as panelists during community meetings, as well as any protocol around recording of meetings by task force members or community. This came up as a result of our last community conversation with the Office of Neighborhood Safety earlier this month. So in the brief staff report, and this is the item where I wanted to make sure the city attorney's office was also here, was that a question came up about if recording of meetings was a violation of the Brown Act. It is not. It is a public meeting. These are public meetings, so it's not a violation of the Brown Act. And then what I also did was just included a section from the city council rules of procedure and order, which was adopted back in 2003, but it's been amended many times. And with regards to recording of meetings, and stating that per that section, all meetings of the city council, because this also came up in terms of if we would allow for city council meetings to be recorded. And this was written, just want to point out, when meetings were in person, but per that section, all meetings of the city council except closed sessions shall be open to the media and may be recorded by tape, radio, television, or photography by a member of the public, provided such recordings do not interfere with orderly conduct of the meetings and do not, because of noise, illumination, or obstruction of view, constitute a persistent disruption of the proceedings. So that's just what's included in the staff report, and it's an opportunity for discussion around this item. Oh, and if I also could just state, I believe part of what brought this up was at the last community conversation, one of the members of the task force asked for all members not to be promoted, and Lupe or Stephanie can correct me. And I think in the past, so what you saw were just a handful of task force members that were associated with that subcommittee, as well as the members of ONS that were on the panel and speaking. And in the past, I believe there has not been that request. And so all members of the task force have been promoted in the past. And I believe that past meetings have also been recorded by non-city staff. So I just wanted to state kind of maybe how it came up and why it came up this last meeting and not previously. But with that, I open it for discussion.
Thank you. Yeah, Marisol?
Yeah, I wanted to better understand when you mean obstruction or disruption. How do we clarify what that means?
So I am, and the city attorney can help me. Like I said, this was written, I think, when meetings were in person. And so it says because of noise, illumination, or obstruction of view, you're just saying constituting a persistent disruption. And so my understanding is, back in the day, where you may have had big lights and cameras, and you may be in the way where somebody in the audience couldn't see the council, something of that nature. And I think things are different, of course, because this is now all virtual and via Zoom. But I will let the city attorney clarify or add to that.
Yes, you are correct. So it was designed back in the day for in-person meetings, but I suspect we could all come up with some example of how it could be disruptive here too, depending on the recording equipment. So one time in my former city, we had screens that were being shown to present whatever planning project it was. And we had a news crew come in with bright lights, like they have, that were so bright and set up that you couldn't actually, if you were sitting at the council dais, you couldn't actually see what the presentation was because of the way the room was set up. So we had to ask them to, hey, you're going to have to stop recording unless you can arrange your lights so that the council could see the presentation materials. And in my history, we've also had folks with like noisy recording equipment so that it was buzzing around and the audience members couldn't hear it because whatever mechanical thing they had, it was just sort of going, "Mm." And so people sitting nearby couldn't hear it. So disruptions like that we could prevent, but for most ordinary things, you know, if we're hitting the record button or if I've got my phone recording the meeting right now, it's not disruptive and we can't really prevent it. So it's got to be something bigger than that.
Okay, and so I'm interested to see how one member who is not part of any single subgroup, who is not part of implementation, who is not supporting the community presentation that is going on, is able to record and keep their camera on, which is very disruptive and inappropriate when they're not speaking and yet are on the screen. And in my mind, that is very disruptive when you are presenting on this, when there are people talking on the screen, you're trying to gather their information, and you have one person that is presenting, that is not presenting, but is still showing their screen. And so I'm trying to get more of an example on Zoom that, because you're giving physical in-person examples.
Yeah.
And I'm trying
So
to
are you
better
meaning like if I'm just flailing my hands around, but I'm not talking, I'm just sort of.
and
Yeah.
that would be disruptive, or you would count that as disruptive?
Well, it's an interesting question as to whether we would count that as disruptive. Are there alternative means that we could take so that we could prevent that from being disruptive?
That's
This
what
is
I
going
would
to
like
test.
to-
Yeah, this is going to
That's
test.
what I would like to, if I need to make a motion to say that if recording is allowed, then if you are not speaking, especially at a community conversation, that your camera would be turned off. Because the way that the Zoom webinar is presented is that anyone that has, just like city council, anyone that has their camera on is now on the screen. And so is there a way that, or is there anything that would prohibit us from creating a guideline for future community conversations that would simply say, if you are not presenting or in the work, involved in the work, that your camera would be off?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I have to say, I don't actually know the answer. Because if you were doing it and live in-person meeting, we wouldn't require people to come in with bags over their head or otherwise hide their face. And essentially, I think what we're saying is, can we require people to go on the blank screen like some of the folks are with just their name showing? And isn't part of being at a meeting having people know that you're at the meeting?
If
So
it
it's a good
is
question.
relevant to the meeting, if it's relevant to the meeting, like what Miss LaShonda White said, was that panelists who are presenting and ONS staff that were a part of that community conversation were the only ones allowed, and they were the only ones that requested to be panelists. But yet one member, because of their desire to record on their personal device, had their camera on, and they were not presenting. They were not a part of the presentation. They were not a part of the subgroup, and yet they are in the meeting as though they are.
So it would be like if I was not a member of this committee, which I'm not, and I had hit the record button for myself. Yeah, I think that's not going to be an argument that we're going to have success on. If they're, related to it, it's like on the city council meetings where we've got the speakers who are going to come up later. I think it's going to be a tough one to make, but I haven't done the research on it and I haven't seen any cases on that. The Zoom technology is all new. So I'm not sure that that's when we, want to go down the path, because it seems to me it's sort of minimally disruptive, but allowing somebody to record it. People could be recording meetings for various reasons, that maybe I've got a learning disability and I can't hear and I need to go back and listen to it, or, all kinds of good, reasonable reasons where it would be a good accommodation to allow somebody to record a meeting.
And
So
this
it's an
isn't about
excellent question.
recording. This isn't about recording. This is
Mhm.
about turning the camera off when you are not in presentation mode and you are not on a screen. I understand completely the legality of needing and accessibility
Mhm.
needs. It is not about the recording of it. It is about the member disrupting because they are not
Yeah.
presenting and their
Yeah.
camera is still on.
I think
and
it's gonna be a tough argument for us to make. It's like the case we were talking about earlier with the Nazi salute. Just that simply being there was that person's speech essentially.
And then
So-
and then I just have another question around consent. Without the task force consent of
Yeah.
knowing that person would be there in that
Yeah.
space, and how inappropriate or appropriate that is without the larger group's consent.
As a public meeting, we don't have the ability to require to get consent, right? We can't require all of us to sign off and consent to it because we're in a public meeting. I think the best we could do is on a Zoom meeting right now is if we didn't want our picture shown is to go with the blank screen, which then of course has the whole other argument. Then people are arguing, are they really there? Or have they gone off to do the dishes or eat dinner without us or something like that? Excellent questions, but I don't think the answer is allowing us to do what I think you want.
Thank you. I see Ben and then Don and then Tamisha. Ben?
Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm trying to understand. It's not about recording, but it's about, yeah, I'm just trying to understand what is the problem, I guess, that we're trying to address. I'm just a little confused, Marisol.
Do I respond or no? Or wait?
I'm
If
sorry,
that's
is this
okay
not,
with-
is the discussion, my bad if I thought we were discussing.
if that's okay with Don and Tamisha, if Marisol can respond.
Or is it public comment? If it's public, then I'm sorry about that.
I'm okay with it.
Yeah, Marisol, you want to
Can
clarify?
I do a point of order? No.
Yeah, point of order, Tamisha.
I'm trying, okay. I'm just trying to track this meeting because a lot is happening right now. And I heard Marisol make a motion. And then it felt like like we went immediately like into some questions and discussions with the city attorney absent a motion. So I'm just trying to track
No.
what's occurring in the meeting. Maybe that's appropriate, maybe it's not. I'm just trying to, figure out where we are at.
I don't think a motion was made. I think Marisol asked if it would be possible to make a motion, but that was a question directed at the city attorney. It wasn't an actual motion.
Thank you for the clarification.
And sorry, Marisol.
Yeah, thank you. So Ben, were you at the community conversation last with ONS last week?
Was it the one before that? I was not at the ONS.
Okay, so for people that attended last week's meeting, we had an incredible conversation with Sam Vaughn from the Office of Neighborhood Safety and his staff. And like people have said, generally, all of us are promoted to panelist. However, this time we were not promoted to panelists per a task force who is on that subcommittee's request. So I had just asked, oh, do you guys see I'm here? Promote me to panelist. They said no. Only the people that are presenting should be on the screen. I said, okay, great, I'll stay as an attendee. And then I saw Don Gosney. And that's when I said, Don is not in this subgroup. Don is actually not on any subgroup. And he's not on any implementation subgroup. And yet he is on the screen as a one white man with a lot of people of color.
Oh my God.
Just staring at everybody. And the perception was very, very triggering to see this on screen, and it was very distracting to really understand what people were saying when one person who was sitting there but not saying a single word, not in the presentation, is there with 4 other people that are doing the work who have done the presentation. And yet this one person is able to become a panelist, to record, and to have his screen shown during this entire time while no other task force member is able to. And so that's what I was thinking. And that's why I questioned Tamisha, is there a guidelines? Is there a way that we can say when we're in community conversations or in public hearings, if the recording is available, then, and Don has many accessibility needs that he needs to meet, okay, you need to record that, but do you need to show your face? Because to me, it goes against what the presenters wanted. The presenters wanted people that were in the work presenting. And to have one random person and not the complete task force was very distracting and very inappropriate. And so that's why I asked, what are the policies? What are the procedures? Can we create guidelines? We need to record, absolutely. And in city council, this is exactly what happens. When a staff person needs to be spoken to, they turn on their camera and they speak. However, Don was not speaking. Don was not presenting. Don is not in the work. And yet he was there. And so I just needed to better understand how that even happened, and if there are any ways or guidelines that we can suggest to say the people that are involved in this work should be the most uplifted in the community.
If I could just really quickly, I just want to, and I could be wrong on behalf of Stephanie and Guadalupe, because normally for previous meeting community conversations, we have promoted everyone. My understanding is so that Don could record. They promoted him to panelist. I do not believe we even asked, like Don, by, this is what was requested by a member of the task force for only certain people to be promoted. Would you mind? I do not believe, unless Stephanie or Guadalupe can correct me, that we even asked that question of him. So I don't know that that was something, I just, on behalf of, just want to say Don and our staff, I don't know that that's something we asked or even shared with him about the fact that he might be the only task force member not associated with that subcommittee promoted as panelist. I don't know that we did that. So I just want to state, when you're asking how did that happen, he needed to record. He asked to record. We have no way to say no to him to record or anyone else. And the way we knew for him to be able to record was to promote him to panelist. And we did not ask for his screen to be off. So I just want to clarify that.
Thank you. Before we move forward, I just want to do a quick time check. It is 7:13, and I do see several hands up. I do want to clarify that it does not seem like the issue is the recording, but the issue seems like it's whoever's recording having their camera on if they're not involved in the presentation. Is that accurate, Marisol? Okay. Ben, did that clarify for you?
Yeah, I did. Thank you. I think I got it figured out. Appreciate it.
Okay. And again, that being the issue, seeing several hands up, I just want to encourage us to move to a place where we can come to an agreement on how we're going to move forward. Shall this issue come up again? Don, I do see your hand.
Thank you. First off, this is a discussion item. There's no action allowed. We're just on a discussion item, aside from just continuing to discuss. And since I am the person that was so disruptive by my face being seen on the screen, I wanted to address on this. A little back history might be a benefit. In 1966, the good people of California passed a statewide proposition to amend the state constitution of California that would not only allow, but would prohibit community groups like city councils and state legislatures from not allowing the media and the public from recording in multiple ways, as was put down there. What was in the agenda packet came straight from the state constitution. passed by the people of California. Been in effect now for over 50 years to allow us to record. And I've recorded every single one of our task force meetings and every one of our community conversations as a member of the media. Okay. And one of the reasons that I do it is one, to make sure that it shows up, because staff will admit they at least 3 times, I believe 4 times, they have asked me for my recordings because for one reason or the other, their recording didn't work, including last Wednesday night. There would not be a recording had I not recorded it because I think it was like 38 minutes into the community conversation before they hit the button on that. Of course, I've always been glad to share with them on that. But when the city records and places it on their website, it has been more than a week sometimes before it is made available to the public and the media. So it is no longer a news story when we don't have access to that. And it's not important to me that my picture be shown on there. If anybody asked me that night, can you please turn off your camera? I would have done it just like what I've just done right now. I have no way of turning off my name on there. That's not a Zoom function. If it was, I would do it. It's not important for me to be seen. It's not important for my name to be seen on there. And so if somebody had said that I was so disruptive, especially the fact that I'm a white person, that was so disruptive and unsettling and triggering for people, my goodness, I've never been accused of being a disruptive person just because I'm white. That's offensive to me. It really is. But if they said that they wanted me not to be seen on there, I would have done it. I would have turned off my camera on there. But the only way for me to be able to record is to be made a panelist. And I appreciate it. I've always asked staff if they can do this for me, and they've been very accommodating for me. Staff at every level has been accommodating for me on that, and I appreciate that. And I try to thank them as much as possible on that. But all you have to do is ask me. I have no problem with turning off my camera. You don't have to have a task force policy for something like that. Since I'm the only person that it applies to, just say, Don, will you just please turn off your camera in situations like that? I have no problem with that. Thanks.
Yo, we got 13 minutes. Can we limit these public comments, especially if people are speaking multiple times? I hope we don't have to extend this meeting.
Thank you, Armand. Tamisha, I see your hand.
Yes, just wanted to try to offer some solutions to what seems to be simple but complicated. Maybe there could be some instructions offered to members of the task force who want to be advanced, but there's a presentation going on. I know there are tools in Zoom where you can make yourself not seen while the panelists are being seen and still be allowed to record. You know, I think city staff should be accommodating to all community and task force members as they have been. But I think maybe if some instructions could be offered on the front end, then it might mitigate a lot of, you know, what we have had to experience tonight.
Thank you, Tamisha. I agree. I think when I tuned into the meeting, my concern was folks associating Don with ONS, which if Don and ONS work together, that's great, but I don't think they do, right? So I don't know if that caused any confusion, but I agree. I think maybe moving forward, maybe having a little bit more guidance from city staff around the proper procedures around that. Joey, and then if we can hopefully move forward with the agenda. But Joey, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm a little confused. I mean, we're all adults here. We're all part of a task force. You want to sit in on a meeting or an implementation meeting, even though you're not part of the implementation team. I mean, I don't see what the harm is. I can tell you that the last implementation meeting, there was an issue raised about recording that one. And although I scratched my head and the decision was made was not to record it for transparency purposes and just for informational purposes as well. I mean, what is the harm in recording something? And if something like this comes up again, if there's an individual that's not part of a subcommittee that's going to show up, then just introduce that individual as a task force member, and they're not part of that group. I mean, this is really ridiculous. It's crazy that we've spent all this time on a lot of monotonous ridiculousness tonight.
Thank you, Joey. Seeing no, oh, sorry, Chair Deborah.
Very briefly, I just want to distinguish between the task force meeting and the community conversations, which are public meetings, from implementation meetings, which are not public meetings. And so I don't believe it's appropriate necessarily to record a non-public working group meeting without the consent of the people in that meeting. So,
sorry, go ahead.
Well, and I want to drag us down a rabbit hole here. So maybe I should just leave it, but it's my understanding that the working groups are subject to the Brown Act. And y'all set it up as the committee by official action, so they should.
That's not what
compliant.
the advice that
Yeah.
was given by Bruce.
So I
Okay.
will add that to the list, Heather, in terms of the subcommittee meetings that are less than a quorum that were set up for very specific purposes. We were not provided instructions that those are Brown Act
Okay.
bodies, but we might need to circle back on that if you think there's another interpretation.
If they're
But I
less
will
than,
add that to the list for
they're less
future
than a quorum, you're
conversation.
probably okay.
It is.
Deborah, if I can ask you, what's your issue with recording the implementation meeting?
I don't, so my issue is that the whole purpose of having working group meetings was so that people could meet together and deliberate and discuss things without worrying about having the things that they say in the course of that deliberation be made public and used against them. It's very clear when we have an official meeting, there's an agenda that's published in advance, what's going to be discussed, what will be action items. We have agendas for the implementation meeting, but it's not an official agenda. It isn't recorded in that way as our task force meetings or our community conversations. And we were advised by Bruce Soublé, city attorney, that those were not subject to the Brown Act. And so this is the first time that I'm hearing that. And if that is the case, it may require us to do some rethinking of the way those meetings are set up and organized. But that's my understanding. That's what we were advised. It's just like we didn't record our working group meetings. The point was to be able to have people to be there and have open and free discussion and free deliberations. And that's one of the reasons that those discussions are not generally subject to the Public Records Act, because the idea is for people to be able to feel free to discuss themselves and discuss things and making decisions. It's only once they've made a decision and that becomes part of the public record that is available to the public. But the deliberative process is meant to be private so that it can be a free and open deliberation.
Well, I'll say this. I would go as far as to say that the breakout groups I could see not being recorded, but when you're coming back as an implementation committee as a whole to help minimally to help staff and to have some type of a recording that we can go back and review if necessary, I think is only advantageous. So, when we first meet at the implementation, I think that should be recorded. We go to the breakout groups. You can have free discussion there. And then when we meet back up and we give a little bit of a recap on what was discussed, I don't see the harm in that. If anything, I think that just, it helps us, it helps staff, and it kind of helps us keep going in one direction rather than us getting bogged down with, I don't remember what exactly was discussed on last meeting. I'm just saying.
I don't want to belabor the discussion. This is something that we can put on the agenda for a future meeting. And if the group as a whole wants to vote on whether or not we want to do that, I'm perfectly open for that. But I think that we spent a lot of time on this, and I think we need a motion to extend